Three old friends stood side by side before Cornu. Rotor sheathed his sword, assuming the stance of a bystander. Time has stopped, but in my current state, I probably can barely move. Yes, it's impossible for Masayuki. Masayuki could do nothing within the suspended world. Or rather, it was Rudra who could adapt to it. That was the anomaly. It was a technique learned directly from Veldanava, but normally speaking, it was strange that he had mastered it at all. Even so, Rudra was actually worried about Masayuki. Masayuki was just an ordinary boy, and his body was pushed to its limit just by hosting Rudra. Considering that he had been fighting Cornu while holding back to avoid overexertion, one could appreciate just how exceptional Rudra's skills truly were. Thanks to Feldway's cooperation midway through, the physical burden had lessened. Since the situation had evolved from there, Rudra would be grateful if the battle simply ended here. Well, it'd be nice if it goes that smoothly, but I'd better recover as much stamina as I can just in case it doesn't. With those thoughts in mind, Rudra watched over the situation. Standing directly in front of Cornu was Feldway. In terms of sword skill and existence value, Feldway surpassed the current Cornu in every way. Were it not for the accumulation of fatigue beyond their limits, Feldway was powerful enough to have defeated Cornu single-handedly. Yet, that very Feldway had lowered his sword and was in the midst of trying to persuade Cornu. Abera and Zelario were joining in to assist. As expected of the former original 7 angels, none of them were affected by the suspended world. Since they had worked as Veldanava's hands and feet since an era before the concept of time existed, this was only natural. The conversation among Feldway and the others began with an attempt to soothe the agitated Cornu. Feldway insisted that Cornu bore no responsibility, as he had merely continued the invasion of other worlds under Feldway's orders. Abera and Zelario chimed in, agreeing that exactly, it's all Feldway's fault. Wait, what happened after I died? Cornu asked, bewildered. It had reached a point where fighting was no longer the priority. There wasn't even room to bring up the fact that he had been burned to nothingness by Velgrund. Considering they were carrying on a conversation while time was stopped, it was quite a chaotic scene. For Cornu, none of this made any sense. The true reason Feldway sought to dominate all dimensions and worlds was to resurrect God, Veldanava. And through total domination, he intended to eradicate all misfortune. It was a radical ideology that involved eliminating those who did not submit, but if one followed the philosophy that might makes right, it was indeed one form of an ideal. And Cornu was one of those who believed this to be correct. Unlike Abera or Zelario, he held an ideology closest to Feldway's. Total domination of all dimensions and worlds was still a distant goal, only halfway complete. This was because countless derivative worlds, too numerous to observe, were being born from the central world created by Veldanava. The foundation of their ideology was to be ready no matter which of these other worlds God might reappear in, but Veldanava, the god, had already accomplished his return. That changed everything. If anything, it seemed plans were underway to birth a new world, surpassing even Feldway's expectations. It was no wonder Cornu was confused. Or rather, even Abera and Zelario were bewildered. If our master is about to proceed down the wrong path, isn't it our duty as subordinates to point it out and correct him? Ha! God does not make mistakes. Isn't it the same for you? You are always correct and have never even hesitated. That was because, as a leader, I didn't want to make my subordinates uneasy. Feldway almost said the words, but swallowed them down. To be a leader is to be lonely. No one would follow an indecisive person who is constantly wavering. The more he listened to his subordinates, the less he understood what the right path was. That was exactly why Feldway had pushed through his own concept of justice, and forced it upon his subordinates. Cornu had believed that to be the correct answer. Sadly, in this situation, he was the most troublesome Feldway fanatic. That is what. Tell me, Feldway. I believe in you. So, that is. To Feldway, who had blindly believed in Veldanava, Cornu's argument was painful to hear. If one accepts everything on the premise that God makes no mistakes, there is no need to hesitate over anything. However, in a sense, that was an abandonment of responsibility. Individual opinions become meaningless, and the meaning of one's own life vanishes. Diversity disappears, resulting in a desolate world where only God's opinion is reflected. Yes. When I think about it, I was wrong from the start. Did Veldanava Sama not always desire a world filled with diversity? Even if omniscient and omnipotent, solitude is hateful. It was for this reason that Veldanava separated from Iverge. Such a master would never ignore their opinions. Though late in the game, Feldway finally realized this. We should share our opinions and make better choices, shouldn't we? Don't be ridiculous. What if that leads to a mistake? The smartest person, meaning you, deriving the correct answer will lead to the best result. Feldway groaned, holding his head. However, he had no grounds to deny Cornu's statement. If anything, it was so similar to his own previous thinking that he almost nodded instinctively. But still. Feldway had realized something. Having been given God's cells by Rimuru and returning from the brink of death, he had arrived at a singular truth. Ah, he was there. He was right here. My God had not abandoned me. On the contrary, I was trusted by Veldanava Sama as a program for the birth of the true God. That was the revelation Feldway had received. One could also call it a selfish delusion. Yet, Feldway was overflowing with reverence welling up from the depths of his heart toward Veldanava, and toward Rimuru, his benefactor and the new God. Perhaps because of that, he could not abandon Cornu either. He wanted to persuade him if possible, and had begun listening to others' opinions more than ever before. Hence, the quagmire. Abera and Solario had long since worn expressions of exasperation. No. Even Feldway was quite mistaken. He committed a grave sin. In the first place, you need enough magnanimity to listen to your subordinates' opinions, right? That is important, isn't it? It is because he lacks unshakable conviction within himself that he is swayed by the words of others. Though, that also carries the danger of being swayed by wrong convictions. That is exactly what Feldway was until just a moment ago. Isn't this going in circles? Seeking truth in a discussion with no correct answer won't yield a result. And so, like this, the argument showed no signs of ending. Rudra was already resting. Vulgrand, too, had already decided this was someone else's problem and was guarding Rudra as he worked to recover his strength. Diablo, happening to pass by, glanced at the scene. However, he said nothing. Leaving behind a look of contempt as a parting gift, he simply walked past the spot. Jahil, too, realized that time had stopped. It was his first experience with such a phenomenon, but having gained the ability to perceive information particles, he was able to naturally accept the situation. There were still those standing in Jahil's way. Ultima and Carrera. Their fierce onslaught continued, unchanged from before time froze. And there was one other. Does this feel like time has stopped? The one who muttered this was Yuki. Having observed the flow of time in the other world, Yuki had also developed an immunity to the suspended world. However, that was only because Yuki was a genius. Mai, who should have experienced the same thing alongside him, was left behind just like any normal person. Even Laplace could not so much as perceive the stopped time. The same applied to Leon. Former hero or not, the impossible remained impossible. Consequently, the combat force opposing Jahil had diminished, but that was not an issue. After all, Ultima and Carrera had been handling Jahil by themselves even before time stopped. Moreover, Luminous had now joined the fray. I have a bone to pick with that fool over there, so I shall lend a hand. Looking as if this were only natural, she took her place alongside Ultima and Carrera. Damn women. Jahil's malice-laced abuse echoed through the suspended world as thought. Hearing this, Ultima wore an expression filled with delight. I love it, that look of frustration. I'm going to torment you more and more, okay? You have such a nasty personality, as always. Since I'm kind, I insist that we should put him out of his misery quickly. What are you talking about? You've been using him as a test subject for your new techniques this whole time. That can't be helped, can it? He's just too stubborn. Ultima nodded at Carrera's remark, saying, true enough. Indeed, Jahil was incredibly resilient. His existence value had simply become enormous. Any half-hearted attack would heal instantly. You two haven't changed a bit, but at times like this, I find you reliable. You too, Luminous. We might never cooperate like this again in the future, you know. If you look at it that way, it is a rare opportunity indeed. In terms of raw power, Ultima and Carrera were superior. Luminous was in a similar boat. Wielding the Genesis-class weapon Dharma, she was also excellent in terms of combat ability. Yet, the fact that the battle hadn't ended wasn't because they were merely playing around. Both Ultima and Carrera had devised attack methods clad in nihility. They had finally succeeded in flinging open the door deep within their hearts, something they had sensed for a long time, but had been unable to unlock. Furthermore, they weren't the type to prioritize their own amusement just because they had gained strength from slime cells. While they were getting a little carried away, they were still precisely aiming to finish Jahil off. As for Luminous, she had awakened her memories as the divine ancestor, and was attempting to reintegrate her personalities. Through this, she had obtained unprecedented power, reaching a level that rivaled even the true dragons. The reason they still couldn't defeat him was simply that Jahil possessed an immense amount of magic power as well. If Jahil hadn't fused with them, they would have erased his soul long ago. The frustration of not being able to do so made their words harsh. On the other hand, Jahil was also full of grievances. He should have died, swallowed by his own desires due to Yuki's authority, but he had achieved resurrection through the grace of God. Upon realizing this fact, he regained his twisted confidence, convinced that he had not been wrong after all. And yet, here he was, being trifled with by 3 impudent women. Jahil could not forgive this. His vitality was being whittled away. His exhaustion exceeded his recovery rate. At this pace, defeat was inevitable. This is bad, this is bad. I still have strength left, but at this rate, I'm going to lose. He felt no pain, yet fear was being etched into his very being. For spiritual life forms and especially digital natures, defeat becomes reality the moment they believe they have lost. Jahil was panicking, continuing to fight back without any clever schemes coming to mind. With time stopped, all mission-type techniques were rendered unusable, creating a situation that was distinctly disadvantageous for him. Even before this, Yuki's interference had prevented him from achieving any effective results. And now, he had reached a complete dead end. Jahil cursed his luck, but that alone would not improve the situation. Even though the secret technique that he had finally grasped, the quantum splash, was unusable within the suspended world, where the laws of physics held no sway. I, the great sorcerer emperor, cannot be allowed to rot in a place like this. Jahil projected his thought like a roar of rage. I will burn you all to ash. Fueling himself with that rage, he activated his authority. Even the hellfire of the ultimate enchantment and I, Lord of Flame, could not be projected within the suspended world. However, inside his own body was a different story. What is he? I can observe the laws of quantum fluctuation on the surface of his body. It seems he is plotting something. Who cares? Whatever he's planning, I'll smash it head on. Those were the reactions of Ultima, Luminous, and Carrera. They attempted to move in their own ways, but Jahil's attack, born of desperation, exceeded their expectations.